Hi everyone, welcome to an amazing new morning. What our discussion today, HR 2023 Business Restructuring with Ribea, Elise. What we want to be focused on during this season is we don't want to be restricted by a lot of things that we sometimes can have fine and that we sometimes can have right. We want to have us focus on that is the business restructure of organizations. And I am really have decided to really do next year in 2 office wardrobes, and it is this wardrobe that we are going to do throughout the year next year. And we are also going to do another wardrobe that we want to be firm on the structured process of our generation and of the office environment that is businesses in our generation, and that is the employment of everyone in our generation, right? So I want to have myself next. I want to next year really have the structured education of what I'm trying to have businesses listen to, that has become the every employee's opportunity at the office to be fine, and the every society's opportunity to be fine in our generation, in where our generation finds themselves at, and with what our generation has been challenged with during the year. And that's why our HR 2023 did not only focus on the office environment itself, but it focused on the society and the restructuring of a generation in general, and how we are required to set processes that are fine, and to have processes there that are fine, and processes that are that society in general feels fine of being part of a generation in general. It is that there's a lot that has happened in countries that have challenged our people, and that our businesses find themselves challenged with. But the requirement is for the education on hand, and for the education that therefore affects every one of us to be in such a way that every one of us that presents as being human beings on earth to find themselves not being divided, not being deprived. I always educate on not non-abusive processes, but processes that are firm and fine for everyone. What I want to start today on is the office environment itself, right? I want to start on the structuring of the office environment itself. We are in the month of September, and when we look at the month of September for most of the countries, right, we find ourselves in the office environment of having to structure and to prepare for next year. I always say the month of September, the month of October is your 2 months that you use to prepare yourself for next year. It is the start of next year preparation. And when we start with next year, we educated on our leading this generation, people of color education, that we take one step back approach, right? We take an approach of what happened during this year, and what were we challenged with during this year, and our challenges of last year, how did we meet with our challenges of last year, and our challenges that a generation had this year, and that office and businesses had this year, in having to make sure that they prepare better for next year. When we talk about challenges, we really talk about, when we look at the office environment itself, we look at having processes implemented in our office environment that are structured processes, that are, when I look at my experience that I've gained at Nibblebits many years in the office environment itself, being a health and safety officer myself, being in the human resources department myself, having to train people myself, having to learn about the structured process of a business, and my own experience. Yes, with that managers educated me, but my opinion on the structuring of our generation in general. And when I gained experience at Nibblebits many years ago, I learned the requirement of a generation and our businesses. When I focus on the businesses, on the prospect of the businesses itself, that I want to today allow myself to listen to that is a set process that are required when we manage our businesses. A set process that are not only a policy for an organization, that when you read on an organization's a notice board, then you learn this is an organization's policy and this is a process, right? This is a procedure for what is required of you at your daily task. What I want to have us listen to and where I want to have us be in our discussion is that the structured process of the office itself is that requirement that when I was employed health and safety officer, I had the opportunity to learn that health and safety requires me to have my regular inspections on the health and safety and the safety equipment at the business, to have my regular set inspections 3 times a year on how the employees feel in the organization, with what's required and with the safety procedures in the company. And I had my regular inspections on dangerous functions and daily tasks that might sometimes, be endangered for the employee that finds themselves endangered by that. That is a process for organization, and that sometimes require us to structure and to implement and to revise those processes on a regular basis. So when we look at the office environment, and when we look at specifically the month September and the month of October, the month of November, we really want to have a generation listen to that. That is, what is it that we need to structure to prepare ourselves to manage businesses next year? Why? Because businesses are challenged with the aggressions of poverty in this world. And the one thing that I've learned is that certain South Africa has got a whole lot of this, the labor guide, a whole lot of processes, organizations that provides processes to companies, right? That provides the policies, they draft the policies, they draft everything that's required for the organization for the companies to be really functioning in a way that is fine for everyone at the organization. The companies and organizations are really sometimes required to find themselves affirming themselves to that. There is a structured process when we manage our businesses on every level of business management. And the only one thing that companies might find themselves not having much structure around would be sometimes on a daily task that are required for an employee to meet, that finds themselves working in departments where they produce, in departments where they manufacture, in departments where they package, in departments where they sometimes have those jobs find nobody but have a few structured processes that is they have the different departments, right? And when I can really count the 5 departments on my hand, it was really a packaging, a production, a receiving area. It was really your office departments, and there was really the departments that was your maintenance departments. There are 5 structured processes that can sometimes be managed in a way that the manager manages the process and the structured process required, and what is it that is now not that is not manageable, but those requirements that can be met on every level is that every company has to find themselves structuring themselves at. And that's where the human resources function focuses on the job descriptions of the employees, right? I've made an example now when I was busy preparing this process, and I told myself that when businesses find themselves having so much aggression in our generation, and the only requirement that they have is to structure themselves in a way that they can meet the requirements of employees, but they can also find hand in working with government requirements to businesses in general. And it is not that the unemployment rate of a generation and the unemployment rate of South Africa is out of control and that businesses can't meet those requirements. No, it is that the only thing businesses require in our generation to do is to find themselves structuring themselves with when they said to Ribea, you're going to be the health and safety personnel in the health and safety officer of business. And then Ribea said, but I really really do not know what would be required of me to do. And then I learned that health and safety is that structure at a business that requires structured processes, structured management processes, right? And that structured management processes that I learned in health and safety was not only required for the business to manage the safety requirements and responsibility to employees and to the business itself, but it was really that businesses had to find themselves manage the business in a way that is a structured process, because that has been Ribea Elise in the office, right? Ribea Elise at the office was not the Ribea Elise that had to learn to be the best human resources person in the world, or had to be the best health and safety personnel in the world, or had to be the best trainer in the world. But Ribea Elise was there to learn about what is it that our generation can do to structure office better in a way that is non-abusive to the employee, to the society in general. Because remember, Ribea Elise came from a household where there was a lot of challenges in the household, right? I went to go and study, and I almost didn't have the opportunity to study when my sister gave me the education opportunity. And I told myself that I really do not want to do this, because who wants to be for how many years in school, and then after all those 20 years you still, or 18 years, you still have to go and study how many years further in order to find yourself in a daily job. And I remember giving up that education those years, and then I got another opportunity to go to Boland College, and I then decided to do human resources. Why? Because I was firm on the structure required in our generation, and our generation having to learn that there's a management process in our generation required, and that no person want to find themselves exhausted of school years, then they still go and have to do 7 years of studies, and then they still have to go and be employed to pay a house and a car for how many years before they can relax and before they can enjoy where they find themselves at, office hours is 40 hours a week, a 7-day week, right? And that forms part of 5 days in the office environment. And only because of that, when our generation learns to manage processes in a way that they structure the office environment so that no one in the office feels abused, so that everyone in the office can learn to meet the requirements without having to be exhausted and without having to really do a 40-hour at the office, they can sometimes, in our generation, can find way around that. That is 5 days at the office and 2 days off of work, 2 days with family and friends, It is those processes that we want to really, when we educate next year, that we have learned that our generation will challenge to it, and that we have to press through with educating a generation out of that is abusive to society and abusive to the human brain and to the human wellness on earth. It is all of our responsibility as managers, as parliamentary leaders, as business owners, as community people, as the society in general, to form part of that is a generation being fine, being well on earth, and therefore the processes that are being managed need to be managed in a way that are non-abusive to society in general, that does not cause wars in countries, that are preventative to abuses of humanity, and that are preventative to oppressions and humanity feeling challenged and mentally abused and imprisonment and crime rates that are sometimes, when our generation look at the year 2023, we learn that the processes are crazy and chaotic, and therefore we need to structure in a way that the structured environment forms part of our every education generation in general. What we want to focus on when we conclude this year as business owners in the office and being office managers, we want to focus on a few points that I'm going to mention when I want to educate the generation on how to structure business in a way that is non-abusive to the society in general. Because the society are being affected when the society finds themselves employed in businesses that are sometimes abusive and aggressive to the employee and to the society. It is our generation has learned that generations of leaders and political leaders have worked on first world countries and third world country processes. And our generation's requirement in this era and season is to look at what's really required rather than wanting to create processes in countries that are war processes, that are processes that people prepare themselves for war for a few years from today, that people prepare themselves for war a generation from our generation, and all of these processes that we can in our generation get right, and that can in our generation be non-abusive and non-aggressive to the society in general, are those processes that when we look at the office environment, we look at having to educate the office teams and the office managers and the office business leaders on how to structurally manage officers in ways that they work hand in hand with parliamentary requirements and with responsibilities in countries that we find ourselves at, in businesses and in owning and in managing businesses at. Therefore, some of the processes were explained to our generation in a very easy way with our employee policies and our employee procedures, right? The job policy, what does your job procedure require of you, and what are you required to be functioning on in your job, right? The policy is in a job, in every person's job, right, is that the job requires you to function on, and the procedure of that is a structured process on how you're going to function on the task at hand, right? And when we manage business in such a way that we learn that every job function is going to be different for every employee. And when we revise the job functions, and I know that most of the companies revise job functions once a year. When we revise our job function, we do not only revise it to deal with disciplinary hearings and to prepare ourselves for disciplinary hearings in certain job processes, but we really revise job functions, policies, and structured processes and procedures. We revise that once a year, only because we are preparing for the next term year and how to make the role in a way that is non-abusive to the employee. Because when the employee finds themselves challenged at work, it's going to be an unemployment rate, and it's going to be aggression in society in general. And therefore, we educate on the policy at hand, and the procedure or the structured process is the same as the procedure at hand, and what are required of the procedure, and how are the procedure required to be managed, how are the policy required to be met, right? The requirement that is the job agreement, that is the signed contract, is now not only your policy, but your stipulated policy goes hand in hand with the structured process of the job, and the job at hand is the procedural function of that process. And we really don't want to get people confused with the wording, because I myself was in the office environment and I found myself really challenged with the wording of how policies are explained and how procedures are managed and implemented in businesses. And I've learned that the employee needs to learn that the job policy is that politically for your job function, this is the requirement of the role. Procedurally, you are gonna do the job in a way that is different for you, and therefore, how are you finding it in the job? Are you still procedurally doing the job in all the stipulated structured requirements, or are you having to learn that the role has changed? There's been COVID-19 challenges. There's been differences in office environment. There's been differences in processes in business. And because all the processes have changed and are different, how do you, the employee, find yourself having to learn that your job function maybe have changed, and you may be required to perform your role or to do what you're required to do in a different way, or you maybe have learned something totally different when the season, what the challenges that were before COVID-19 season, and the challenges that employees daily have that relates with parliamentary queries, that relates to so much different functions, that sometimes the role has somewhat changed for some employees. And all of those processes needs to be revised, and that we then include in a job description, right? And when the policy, the required legislative policy, the structured process are then drafted onto a job description, then the job description make way for the mental wellness required and for the training required, because the training required is the mental wellness process. That's where health and safety goes hand in hand with the job description of the employee, right? And that's where we want the health and safety part onto the job description as business owners, and to make the office environment easy so that we don't find ourselves managing processes that are in danger to employees, and that forms part of the daily task, that forms part of the challenge in the job, that forms part of how on-the-job training are required. And then sometimes we wanna go to the health and safety person and go and blame the health and safety person, when in actual fact it's a job description. It legislatively explains the policy required to perform the job, how politically means in the job function, and how the law stipulates the specific role or the specific position that you have. How are you required to perform, and what is the company required to legislatively provide for you in that role? Structured process, your structured way in how you as the employee would perform or function in the job. And then the job description, how are you exactly functioning in the job itself. Then you get to the mental state of the job itself, the mental wellness fact that forms part of the health and safety part on the job description. That is, how mentally can the job challenge you? What mentally are the business required to do to, on a health and safety level, be in line with the employee safety requirements, as well as legislatively and business requirement of the business itself. And that's all on one job description. That's how one job description should be for every employee in the business. And not for every employee in general, but for every different job function. That's a structured process. What Ribea Elise recommend to business owners to structure their job descriptions in a way that it is easily explainable. My mama Anna always used to say, I can't read and write. I don't know what you mean. I can't speak. Come and write this down for me. Because such is the world in general. That when we explain it in a ways that people can listen to what we are saying in general in the office to people, and when business owners don't explain wordings that Ribea and Elise say, oh, but you talk like you talk a different language, like bonjour, madame. You just sometimes have to say that. And then it's like, sometimes it's, someone always used to say the opposite, nobly, but Daryl always used to say, hello ma'am, how are you? And then she says the people call, and then she can't, no, she doesn't realize what they're saying. Mama Anna always used to say that also. Mama Anna said, oh, this language is bonjour, madame. Tell me how are you and where you from, you know? And sometimes we can really structure offices in ways. And one of the things that we can prepare for next year is to have job descriptions for every role and function that is outlined and in a way explained to employees, that employees exactly understands what is required of them in the role and in what they're required to do in the daily task. And that is what you call the policy of your job description, procedural structure of it, your mental wellness requirement and mental wellness political requirement of the job, and then the training required goes hand in hand with that. And that needs to be on every job description. And that is when the health and safety. And then another thing that I want to focus on when it comes to the job descriptions, right? There's one thing that I want to have us listen to, and that is going to be, what was I thinking this morning? It was a job description, and then next to the job description, it is that your job function is most now requiring, then it is revising that. So it's easy for everyone in every business to run over the information and to want to work how they want to work. But when we're going to manage the office in a way that is fine for everyone that finds themselves being part of society and being abused with poverty, the poverty circumstances in the world, Then we want managers, human resources people, and the employee itself to be able to sit around one discussion room and to be able to listen to that. That is the revising of that. That is your daily task. That is required of you, the employee. That's where people want to find a way around, and they want to do it this year, and next year they don't do it with all the employees, and they don't follow the process properly, and that becomes part of the human resources function. Yes, but some human resources personnel find themselves busy with other things at offices, and that is why we want to be firm on that structured management legislative requirement for all of those functions to be managed in a way that the reporting of all of the information required in certain processes and in certain environments in business that are challenging for some people, that those reporting informations to be on hand, available once a year when the job descriptions are revised. How do you revise a job description? You revise a job description when you look at a company that have, like I said about Nibblebits, right? 5 different job functions. You want to revise those job descriptions in a way that you revise each and every job description of those functions. Then the human resources personnel takes 10% of all 5 departments, and they then are required to revise the job description. And the human resources personnel is not only a human resources person, but the manager at hand, because the human resources personnel exactly educates the manager at hand what are required in the revising of those job descriptions. And when the human resources personnel revises their 5 job descriptions in the office and in her business, then the manager are required to do his 10% on all of those job functions, right? You take 10 personnel, you go through their job descriptions with them, and you revise that once a year. And that is not you take 10 documentation and you sit with a paper and you go and check. No, you revise it with, at least if your company Nibblebits had employees, about 1,000 employees at any season, you take out the 1,000 employees in every job function, you take 10 people. And in every job function, that manager are required to revise the different job descriptions of those 5 different job functions of 10 employees per job function, right? And when you revise those documents, you make it easier for government, and you make it easier for health and safety policies to be managed and procedures to be managed in organizations, and you make it easy for political arguments that governments are having with international business owners that has their businesses involved in all of the aggressions that affects the society and the community in general. Those are processes that we learn in-house in the office, and that I have learned at Nibblebits. But it's not only that I have learned that, it is that those are your required processes that needs to be structured. It is that Ribea Elise was not the person who was now having the labor guide team that was sitting next to her and that were educating her. This is all our amazing things that we have invented. No, Ribea Elise was the person that was sitting, and Ribea Elise learned that there's a labor guide. Okay, that means this and that. Then Ribea Elise learns that labor guide has all of this information, and they can work hand in hand with businesses, and they can actually manage the business in a way that is amazingly structured for every business. Then Ribea Elise learned that not all the organizations signs with labor guide, and not all the organizations fund labor guide to guide them on how to manage their businesses, because they really have structured processes. And then Ribea Elise learned that everyone labor guide does not work with people like Ribea, but they work with Wendy Newton. Wendy said that labor guide was amazingly there, and they serve the information through, and they have all the documents, and they have amazing ways on how businesses can manage their processes and their structures in countries. And then Ribea Elise learned that what labor guide had was not a process for one company, but a requirement for every organization to be managed in a way. And actually, labor guide manages it only when organization pays them and works for them. And that's not how the process should be. The process was required to be a process that are managed in-house in South Africa, and all the organizations work hand in hand with the labor guide and both structured processes like the labor guide teams, and they then provide all the required structured processes to businesses, and businesses then manages the businesses in a way that are non-abusive to governmental processes and governmental functions. And I've learned that not every company works with them, and not every company pays them that money, and not every company pays them a month, but they are required process in every country. And then the information came to South Africa, and the information came where all the information in the world comes from, to businesses and to everything that we do in this world. And when the information came to South Africa, then South Africa did not all work with a structured process required that I explained thoroughly with how the Labour Guide team has explained the process in their structuring of office and of businesses. And I had quite some time of reading up on it and Googling. When Wendy told me about it, I had quite some Googling scans on what do they really do. They sound very interesting. And then I learned and I saw all of their documentation. It's amazing processes. It's very, very well structured. But every person and every company that is legislatively registered in South Africa specifically, and it's a South African business, yes, but every company in South Africa specifically needs to legislatively apply to that is the Labour Guide requirements and structured process management in every organization. And when South Africa manages that process in South Africa, then South Africa internationally educates the international world on how to manage office and how to manage business in the same way. That forms part of the legislative requirement of business owners to be managing businesses in a way that's non-abusive to society. I know I said a lot. You're going to have to listen to what I explained about Labour Guide, because I'm going to just explain that again to everyone. I'm not going to explain it thoroughly as I have explained it, but I'm just going to mention a few more things on that structured process and the Labour Guide legislative requirement in countries like South Africa specifically. When we look at Labour Guide specifically, Labour Guide to us sounds like legislative. Labour Guide sounds to us like disciplinariative, right? And when we look at the disciplinarian process of an organization, we look at a process that when it's against when it's against governmental requirement, then they legislatively punishes organizations, right? And what's required and how organizations should manage certain processes. When I look at what Labour Guide are required to do, then I learned that Labour Guide has got structured functions for every part of the human resources function of businesses. And the human resources function is the business itself. It is how the business are required to manage, because from the business manager, the human resources manager becomes your Labour Guide person. The human resources manager manages the process for the business in a way that the business are structured. Every business manager understands his specific managerial requirement, but the human resources manager will be able to structurally guide the business manager through how to structurally manage the process in her 1 year, so that her process can be managed in a way that government doesn't find themselves challenged by the business when government has to meet so much requirements of countries and of people in countries, right? So when we look at the structure itself of the legislative requirement of the Labour Guide process, Labour Guide are required to work hand in hand with government, with South African government. South African government are required to then have the human resources person and the business owner of her organization work with the Labour Guide teams on legislative responsibilities in organizations. When human resources people works with the labor guide team, the human resources personnel find themselves listening to what is it that on hand and the job requirement would be the required process for the job to be managed in the business itself. Labor guide give you a drafted structure. Labor guide says legislatively that's required. Those are your basic things that you need to manage at your business. And the human resources person learn that managerially, managers understand their requirements and their processes and their roles and their functions. And the human resources manager sometimes doesn't scientifically know what managers are talking about. And only therefore, the human resources manager becomes then the structured process implementer to those specific roles that they sometimes don't know whether what scientifically people are speaking in businesses that people sometimes require to have managed. And the only requirement that the human resources personnel then has is to structure the process in a way that is manageable for the manager and for the manager to manage the employee and manageable for the business owner to then manage the managers in the business, right? Manageable then for the human resources manager to manage then the processes also in the business. So the processes are all available through the labor guide structured processes explained thoroughly. But then when you go through the labor guide processes, you learn that the labor guide personnel works hand in hand with human resources. Human resources works hand with the managers, because human resources doesn't have the way know what all the jobs requires other than if they work 50 years for a company and they have now really had experience in what's required of the job. Then the human resources would then work hand in hand with the manager to explain to them the structured requirement of every role and of what the job function is. And then the manager would then work hand in hand with the employee, that is then the job description, the policy, the structured procedure, and the mental health and safety, health and wellness process of every individual role and responsibility in the task at hand. That's only when you work with the employees in your business. When it comes to all the other things that your business do, those are all the other requirements and processes that was also thoroughly explained at Nibblebits, amazingly explained through the Nibblebits team. They were very well educated. Mama Universe, I always call it Mama Universe, yes. The force of the universe brought all of us to Nibblebits. We were all that hunt season, and we were all experienced and intelligent in what we are required to learn and with where the world are being structured at in a different season. And while we were all there, I learned that the requirement of the world is to be managed in a way that was explained at Nibblebits. And there was a lot that happened at Nibblebits. And we don't call it a world ruling, we call it was an education that the force of the universe brought us all to the office. And when we got to the office, we all learned that this is required in the world and how the world should manage the offices in the world. And it was very amazingly explained at Nibblebits those years. I was working there from 2011 years until 2013, 2014, beginning of 2014, and then I moved to Bowl and Build It, and it was amazingly explained. I can't really explain the function of Bowl and Build It. It's not difficult to manage, and it's just your businesses that are not really many. Nibblebits was manufacturing, and they really require those management processes in the world in general. And it was well explained at Nibblebits. Another thing that I want to mention, so that is your structured requirement for the labor guide process that structures exactly legislatively how a business structure should be managed. It becomes easier when the labor guide educates the human resource manager specifically on the legislative requirements on business management in your business in general. And after the labor guide manager and labor guide educative team, information giver, because they have the information at hand. The information is on a computerized function, and the information is specifically drafted for the legislative responsibility of the organization to manage legislatively the business in a way that includes every function of the business. And when labor guide works hand in hand with human resources teams in South Africa, and they are working with government in South Africa, and the human resources teams manages the processes in a way in businesses that they are revising every year what's required to revise. They submit it onto government databases. They are managing processes in a way that are stipulated by government, and then that only doesn't become governmental requirements. No, that becomes the business responsibility of the employee. That is not only sick leave and holiday leave and work leave and what leave. No, that even explains the job function, the job requirement. Employees understand their jobs differently. They listen to what's required of them differently. They are explained. The manager then works hand in hand with the human resources person, and the manager explains different job functions then to the human resources personnel, and the human resources team exactly understands on a job description level most of the times what they are reading, and the manager explains exactly most of the time. The manager trains the human resources person and what might be required and how the process can be managed in a way that the human resources person doesn't find it scientifically the information like that scientifically. I always say I didn't go to the scientific class and the mathematics class, and I really only went to 1 + 1 or 1 + 2 or 1 + 3 classes, and I really didn't go to all the mathematics classes. So I really like the simple things in life and explanations in a simple way, because that's how I understand and explain it. And I am not saying that I don't understand, the scientific explanations of requirements in our generation. But I always say that there's a science class, and then there was the economic class, and I was fine at the economic class, and the economic teacher said, Ribea, you are well with your business economics, you are well with doing economics, and it is that you find yourself sometimes out of the science class, because not everything has to be explained scientifically. I always say that the Aisha business is scientifically irritating me, and I find myself in a Vulcan business that is vocally explaining where I find myself at in our generation and what I have been educated about, and I don't like interruptions in that, and I love my Vulcan way of explanation, because when you evoke every day, someone wakes up and scientifically no one has missed nothing, because everyone has learned that that's required in our generation. And that's just where our generation sometimes needs to be with education. Another thing I want to say, so the manager then revises those job descriptions and policies. The manager then works hand in hand with the human resources personnel. The human resources personnel then works hand in hand with the business owner and with the labor guide departments on what's required and how the business should be structured once a year. And those departments work hand in hand then with government, and the documents are then submitted to government. And government doesn't only require documents that is fundings to, but to government requires structured management processes of businesses also. And that's where the labor guide team work with government, and the labor guide team then forms part of that. And that becomes the business management team in a general and in a political leadership way. And that's where we want South Africa to be at. It is that the information is all over the place, and everyone wants to manage it the way that they want to manage it. Legislatively, there's that required, and it's not only that person should have a signed agreement, the person should have an ID, the person should have to understand this is the job description. No, it is that this is politically, you are allowed so many sick leave, politically you are allowed so many annual leave, someone manages that, and that process is what we call the IRD and the SARS processes of that. Then next to the IRD and the SARS processes is your labor guide that becomes every employee at the office, and that becomes your business structure itself. And your business structure itself is now your job description. That's what you need to do. That's the training you require in your job. That's what you can't do in your job. That's mental wellness at the office. And those 5 functions becomes that makes the job function, that makes employees function well at the job, and that makes the business legislatively abiding to that. That is the legislative management of the employees at the business itself. And those processes are not an ID document and a signed agreement and 5 days sick leave and 5 days annual leave. No, that you leave for the payroll team and you leave it on there. We are wanting our organizations to now focus on very, very easily the structured process on how to manage businesses. The way that includes everything, and it's not scientific knowledge. No, it is easy. Wendy said there's health and safety, and Ribea says, oh, let me go and read on Google in. And then I was getting so confused because the one day Google in give me that, and the next day Google in said, oh, you can also do that. But it was information that was really, really, really guiding me and what's happening in the country, because the way I received the information in Googling was like, oh, is it so all over the place? Oh, but it's actually very interesting to learn that the company can actually be structured in such a way. It's actually interesting to learn that you don't need a health and safety person to really know what's happening with the fire extinguisher, because then Ribea calls Frank and Frank.net is on the telephone and Frank is exactly registered and Frank knows to come and inspect 2 times a year, legislative requirements. Then there's a health and safety inspection that Frank also do, and that other teams of government do, and you call them 3 times a year. And you know, and the health and safety person can focus on the on-hand health and safety responsibility. What that goes hand in hand with the employees. What are your challenges? What can't you do today? And those goes on your job descriptions, and those are, this is the safety requirements and the safety responsibility that the company has to the employee, and that goes on the job description. And those are those nitty-gritty responsibilities that once a week we had a meeting, or once a month, and then those meeting information goes on the job description of the specific job. It's being managed by the manager when the manager revises the job description, and those functions becomes easily managed in-house, and the health and safety person doesn't have to find themselves, all over the place about the information that are required to be managed in-house. Another thing that we need to, so what we are saying is that, let me just put it like that, there's legislative functions. Legislative functions mean, when it comes to everything that I'm talking about, your sick leave, your annual leave, those are legislative policies and functions that are required to be managed legislatively. When it comes to health and safety, there's legislative responsibilities that the health and safety requirements need to be met. Those are easily to manage, and that's what I've learned at Nibblebits. 3 times a year, those inspections, you get a Frank.net person's business card that are registered with the government and that knows how to manage the health and safety responsibility of the organization to the company and to its employees in a general way. You work with such a person at your organization, and they work hand in hand with government, and they become part of the labor guide team, right? They almost similar to the labor guide team, but they form now part of the health and safety team specifically. And they work hand in hand with the Ribea, Elise, and that was also an amazing thing of Frank.net, right? To get on the phone to know that 3 times a year, that needs to be met. 3 times a year, health and safety inspections of certain health and safety requirements at the business need to be managed by a Frank person who works with government, who exactly understand what's going to be wrong when there's something wrong by the safety requirements of the business itself. So that's where the Frank person, that becomes your labor guide person that exactly knows all the health and safety responsibilities required. Then work with government, you then work with the human resources person, that is then Ribea, Elise, and he then 3 times a year revises on his checks, and Ribea do the checks that is maybe once a month in all of those checks that she learned that government requires, and that Frank now has educated her that that's now required in the job. Then you get your trainings and educations and all of those functions that also becomes easily manageable when you do it in the same way. 3 times a year your frank process. They call it a frank.net process. 3 times a year your frank.net process. Your frank.net process legislatively. Safety, first aiders, health and safety trainings, and all of those requirements are your frank processes. And you get your frank processes in a way that are minutes that you know in the beginning of the year, I really need my 3 frank processes minutes. In my 3 frank processes is governmentally, how many health and safety people should there be? Is everyone there? Is all the departments there? Is anyone needing to be trained? That becomes easily manageable once you have it in a frank process structure. And then when you're done with those processes of your frank.net processes, then your health and safety meetings becomes easier, and then managing health and safety in the businesses becomes then easier. And then all your other inspections that you do once a week in the business becomes more easier. People learn to be more attentive with what's happening in the business and with what they can report and what they should report and what they have to report, and you know what they should not be lenient on when it comes to their safety at the offices. And then walking through a factory becomes much easier. Nibblebits was baking, so they were baking also, right? So there was ovens, and that becomes your type of frank person for the government that would monitor those processes also 3 times a year. And that type of frank person doesn't only manage it 3 times a year, but he educates managers on how to manage those processes. At Nibblebits, it was all over the place. Ribea managed a little bit here, Bernd Strauss managed a little bit there, that one managed a little bit there, and that can sometimes leave a whole lot of holes and brackets about it. And when it comes to New Zealand having to argue so much about health and safety, you get your frank standard person who legislatively know what's required at everything about the ovens that people are baking at, right? And your frank type of person that works hand in hand with the government, he's government registered, he comes to manage the process, he educates you exactly on the basic things that you need to check. But other than the basic things, you at least allow yourself to 4 times a year or 5 times a year when it comes to ovens, to have that guy come and do his regular inspections with you, and you learn to listen to what is it that you need to check. Because you know what, it can becomes scientifically challenging for a health and safety person to be managing all of those crazinesses. So therefore, legislatively manage things in a way that you have your legislative frank person that manages every specific required process that needs to be specifically managed, that is sensitive to the employees and to the business itself. You need to have those processes managed in a structured way that is your frank way, but then your frank inspections of 3 times a year is not going to be 3 times a year for baking ovens. It's going to be regularly structured management processes. And when it comes to the health and safety person that needs to manage that, and that's where we need businesses to work with managers, so that businesses don't put pressure so much on managers, and businesses just want to dismiss managers. But businesses need to legislatively know that they need to sometimes make funding available to pay for those processes to be managed in a well way and in a safe way for everyone at the business itself. So we have said a lot today, and we are not going to say anything else. Have your frank.net type of person, have your legislative type of person, legislative processes, have your SARS, IRD processes structured. Those are your basic processes, right? Your human resources requirements and responsibility, structure that in a way that managers doesn't go and want to scientifically explain to the human resources department what's required in the business. No, but so that managers can sit with human resources personnel and the 5 basic functions of a business explained to the human resources person in the way that the human resources person exactly knows how to draft it on a job description and on a responsible requirement for the employee to manage the process and to manage his role required in one of those 5 job functions. Right, and those 5 job functions, revising again before we're going to close this video, it was a production function, it was a packaging function, it was a metal it was a, let's say, a human resources function also. It was a receiving function of receiving of goods. There was also a technical function there, and the management of certain processes. The office management of those processes becomes easier because your office people most of the time know what's required of them. But when it comes to the production and the packaging and the receiving areas, the maintenance areas, and all of those departments that in the functions that sometimes requires people to, the cleaning functions of the organization, yes, that sometimes requires people to listen to what are the required duty and how do they manage that and how can they manage that better. Rather than all of these government arguments all over the place, people go and argue and march all over the streets because the whole processes are crazy and chaotic, you know. All of those things need to be managed fine and right. And by this time of year, you want to revise what was challenging in those processes for you this year. You want to prepare how you're going to manage the structured processes next year. And you want to set out your structured responsibilities in your job function to all of those requirements that you found challenged this year. And it doesn't become more difficult, everyone, it becomes more easier. It becomes easier to manage if you have allowed yourself to educate yourself to manage it in a way that is, this is what's required of me to do in here. This is what I was doing in my job. This is, for me in health and safety, it became easier. This is my health and safety trainings that I need to do. And this is the amount of people that needs to be trained in here. This is the job descriptions I need to revise of those health and safety people. This is the trainings that they require. There is international legislative trainings. There is in-house. This is in-house trainings that I can plan for myself during the year. And when you focus on the legislativenesses, the in-housenesses, and the employees' requirement and responsibility to report processes, then it becomes easier to prepare your year and to draft your year and to structure the year. And then you make it easier for management to manage those processes and to do what they are required to do. That's all that I wanted to discuss with today's office structure. Before we do our leading this generation talk, I really want to have us, when we start fresh in every month of leading this generation, you know we talk a little bit information there and a little bit information there, but you will see when you go to office structure what it will be discussing HR 2023 with office structure during the year, and then you will learn all the parts of what we have mentioned, and you would learn what are required and how that processes can be implemented and managed in-house, nationally in countries, and how it can be managed in ways that are fine for everyone. That is it of what we had to say for today, everyone. Have an amazing week. We're doing leading this generation talk next week. So for this week, relax further, everyone. Enjoy our educations, and for those businesses who listens into our educations, continue to listen in, because we are continue to be on point with what we are saying. Don't listen to the video and want to say that Ribea is blah blah blahing over the words. No, when Ribea blah blah blahs over the words, it means you need to go and sit, revise what he's saying, write it down, and find a way to listen to what's required for you and how you can implement that in your business, rather than wanting someone to take your hand and to say, now do this, now do that, now do this. No, remember, we are in a generation that everything is fast-paced. Ribea is not going to explain, now do this, now do that. No, you're going to make time to listen to Ribea, and then you will be able to say, Ribea, okay, if you can explain this to us again this week, we're just finding difficult in how to, we know that you may have experience in this function, Ribea, Elise, because you have worked at Nibbly Bits. Can you maybe explain how we can manage that in a national way, in a country, or in an international way, with what countries are being challenged to it? And that is how I think countries can work with one another. I had a lot to say about a whole lot of processes, and I was angry about King Charles and everyone, but the education was really required, and the education was really the force of the universe bringing us really together to educate us on all of those processes. so that we can share it. Yes, information sharing is very important, and information discussing. And that's where we want to be with today's discussion. Everyone, have an amazing week further.